For all the advances that have been made by women in corporations, there is still data that reveals a very telling truth for Black women in corporate America. Black women are paid less and promoted less frequently than white male counterparts. Black women make 62 cents for every dollar that white men make on average. And for every 100 men who advance to a manager role, 58 Black women do, 80 white women, and 72 women in general. So right now we're going to hear from some women who were able to blaze trails and make advances in their own organizations, not just for themselves, but for other Black women in their industry and in corporate America. We're joined by Bonita Stewart, who is Vice President of Global Partnerships at Google, Erika Irish-Brown, who's the Chief Diversity Officer at Goldman Sachs, and we will soon hear from Monique Nelson as well. She is CEO and Chair of UWG, the longest-standing full-service multicultural advertising agency in the United States. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for joining us. This stark reality that we often hear, the 62 cents on the dollar that Black women make, the managerial roles that are largely much more going to white women than Black women. These are issues that we are all facing. But Bonita, I want to start with you. Some studies out there have said that many Black women are pushing themselves to prove themselves to superiors, to colleagues, without asking for support, without seeking feedback, without looking for advocacy. How important is it for us to be doing that and do it well and not seem weak when we do it? How important is it for us to do it, and how do we go about doing it?
Well, thank you, Sharon. First of all, it's very important. One of the things that we did, Jackie Adams and I co-authored a book, which is coming out next month. It's called A Blessing, Women of Color Teaming Up to Lead, Empower, and Thrive. And it's a foundation through data. And we studied over 4,005 women, desk workers, across all four races, Black, white, Asian, as well as Latinx. But we went across all four generations, so Gen X, Gen Z, millennials, as well as boomers. And one of the things what was so illuminating about this is the generational differences. And so I would say that in order to thrive, it's important for leaders to actually understand these nuances across the generations. And the younger generations, there's a greater expectation. They're mission-driven. They're seeking a place of belonging. So they are commanding more from the workplace. So I think this is actually a more strategic conversation if we elevate and start to look at the future of work, the future of talent, which is abundant, particularly in the Black community, as well as the future of leadership. So when you ask about how do you actually thrive, I think we're now in a new era where there needs to be a complete understanding and at the same time opening new avenues for the talent, because that will make the difference for leaders and for companies as well as in the boardroom.
That's a very good point about the generational differences and understanding that as Black women and Black leaders, how important it is to understand those generational differences as well. But Erika, there are also cultural differences when you're talking about a global company like Google, like Goldman Sachs, many companies where there needs to be a focus also on the cultural differences between Black workers. What is the reality for African women, for Afro-Caribbean women, for African-American, Black American women? Is there a difference there when we're talking about Black women, but when we're talking about the cultural differences as well as we speak about diversity, equity, and inclusion? What needs to be done there?
Yeah, I think there has to be a broad understanding of the experiences of Black people and people of difference around the globe. I think leaders have to be trained in inclusive leadership. I think they have to know their talent. You know, equity is not about just treating everybody the same. It's about knowing your talent, what drives them, their strengths and weaknesses, and bringing out the best in that talent. So, you know, leading across difference is not always easily accomplished, especially if you're not giving leaders the tool and the cultural fluency in order to do that. So one of the things in my role I try to do is make sure that we're giving leaders the tools to lead across difference. And that's how you get to support the fact that diverse teams are in fact higher performing teams. But, like the research that Kathy Phillips did at Columbia University, the big caveat is that those teams have to be well managed. Otherwise, you have your homogenous teams actually being higher performing. So the more cultural competency that exists, especially around Black women, what they most want from work. There has been research done. Those are conversations that people have to be able to have with their teams so that they can bring out the best in those teams.
Monique, how do you have those conversations? I say you almost directly because I am sure your phone has been ringing. You've gotten countless emails from companies that don't have enough women who look like us on their leadership team, and they're calling you to say, what should I do next? How should I be starting this conversation? It's an uncomfortable conversation. I know we need to have it. Where do I begin? Has that been your role at all, particularly in the last few months? And if so, how have you executed that and facilitated that for your own organization and perhaps others?
Sure. Thank you so much. I mean, yes, it's now a time to lead with empathy. It's a time to listen and allow your team as well as your colleagues to let you know what they need. They will let you know that. So it's really a time to talk about inclusive leadership in a way that you've never done before. We've never been asked to reveal how we feel. That's been something we've been trained not to do. And in this moment, we absolutely are asking you to flex a muscle that you've never flexed before, which is that muscle of saying, you know what, I don't know how it feels to be a Black female in corporate America, and how do I do a better job of doing that work? And it's not easy, but it's also something that we know we're going to have to try and do more actively, right? If you start a workout, it's going to be sore in the early days, but as you do it more and more, it becomes, your muscle memory is there, it becomes easier. And ultimately what we strive for is making sure that this is something that becomes a part of the DNA of the organizations that we work with.
And Bonita, one of the key factors also is to not do it alone, to realize that you're not the only one, or try to make an effort for sure that you're not the only one or the one of two, and team up. You say teaming up is very critical here. What do you mean by that, and how do you go about doing that as a woman of color who is trying to advance in your company?
Yeah, so let me first say, one of the things that we found in our study was the fact that 47 of Black women are frequently or always the only person of their race in a professional situation, and in contrast to 73% of white women rarely being the only person of their race. So the Black woman in many cases starts as the only. And there's a few things. When we talk about teaming up, it's teaming up across the sisterhood, because we do think, again, across the generations, there should be more generational alliances. You should know what you don't know, and the opportunity to actually team up. There's new members that are coming into the boardroom, new members that are coming into industries such as tech. We need to make sure that we're facilitating horizontally our own community. But at the same time, there is an absolute outreach for allies. It's something that we're doing at Google. When we think about mentors, sponsorship, there's programs across all of those. But now we're really thinking about allies. And allies also can team up. These are the individuals that are surrounding you in that environment when you are the only. So we need the allies to really think about hiring us, not as the only, but hiring us in multiples. There's no reason to have tokenism today, or no reason to say, I've done it one and I'm done. The opportunity is to really harness the talent and also look for potential. Look for potential in these individuals, provide them with the stretch assignments. But if we have just a plethora of allies along with the sisterhood in terms of teaming up ourselves as we start to multiply across many industries, it will be absolutely an imperative to ensure that the talent thrives. But we need both in terms of teaming up.
Yeah. You know, Erika, there's been research that's shown that Black women are able to find mentors, people that will listen, give them a few minutes of their time to hear their story and talk to them about their aspirations. But finding that sponsor who's really going to advance your career when you're not around, when you're not in the meeting and you're not in the room, is more difficult. And then for some, finding that ally when they have thought of themselves as the only one or the one of just a few is even more difficult. So how at Goldman Sachs are you able to develop and present to people a mentor, a sponsor, an ally? How do you tell people to go out and find those people?
Sure. And I think every relationship is a two-way street. And part of being a leader is being a mentor, is being a coach, is being a sponsor, and using your privilege as a leader, let alone across different dimensions of diversity, using your privilege to help others. So those are three concepts that we do focus on at Goldman Sachs. I'll take a second to step back and make sure everybody is clear on the difference between a mentor and a sponsor. And I will use the definition that one of my mentors, Carla Harris, gave me, which is that a mentor is somebody who knows the good, the bad, and the ugly. And there are people that really they know you and they can give you the feedback and the tools and the counsel in order to do your role on a day-to-day basis. And a sponsor is somebody that knows the good, and the good. They are the people at the senior leadership table. They are the ones that are banging tables for you to have stretch assignments and opportunities and promotion and pay. And they can represent you well at the highest levels of the firm and provide the opportunities that we all want to succeed in the corporate world. So they are two very different roles. Sometimes a mentor can morph into a sponsor, but at the same time, you want them to be distinctly different. For us, a lot of the mentorship actually happens through our inclusion networks and within our divisions. We do not have firm-wide mentorship programs. However, we do have firm-wide sponsorship programs where you have senior leaders, especially those who are involved in the inclusion and diversity committees, that are sponsoring our diverse colleagues for promotion into the managing director level of the firm. Right now, we are very focused on allyship, especially when it comes to Black racial equity. We certainly had an ally program for the LGBTQ plus population and champions for women, but we think in this current environment, Allies for Racial Equity is an important initiative for our firm, so we are rolling it out firm-wide. We have an ally guide and toolkit that we will be rolling out to make sure that people understand what the lived experiences are of Black people, that they understand the history and they have the tools to learn and not just have to rely on their Black colleagues to teach them, why systemic and institutional racism exists, but to really make them culturally competent, to be able to stand up for racial equity, take the struggles on as their own, and acknowledge that this conversation is not about them, but rather, advancing racial equity at the firm and transferring the benefits of their privilege to those who lack it. So all three of those concepts are really important and alive and well at Goldman Sachs. But the last thing I'll say is that you have to give people the tools in order to play those roles. You can't expect people to just know how to be a mentor, a sponsor, or an ally, without giving them the tools and the support to do that.
Monique, I wanted to ask you about allyship as a Black CEO. How do you find allyship, build that for your company, for your employees, but also build that in your industry? What are some of the tools that you go about using to facilitate allyship?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that we have at the core of our business, for the last 51 years is the fact that, there is a DROI, and that is a diversity return on investment. We are looking at the next 30 years in the US, the 90% of the growth is going to come from 3 communities. that's African American, that's Latinx, and that's Asian. And if we don't really talk about making sure that that is inculcated in our cultures and a part of our strategies moving forward, we really are talking about leaving a great deal on the table, as well as not necessarily doing the right things for our business. So it's imperative that as we talk to our allies, we can talk about doing good as well as doing good in our businesses. It's really, really important that we frame this as this is a business. These are communities, and our health equals our wealth. And we have to make sure that that health is everywhere, in workplace safety, in our profitability, in our employee retention. It's something that is ubiquitous in our businesses, and we really do strive at Uniworld to ensure that it is part of the DNA. It's integrated into your businesses. It's integrated into how you innovate and produce products and make things happen in your organization. We all know that diversity absolutely brings the best ideas, and it also brings higher profitability, anywhere from 15% to 35% when you start to introduce true innovation throughout your organization, and it can deliver the ROI that we're looking for. And the last thing I'll say is, we all pay attention to what's happening to our PE ratios. And that is about whether or not your organization is set up for the long term. Are you future-proofed? And at this stage of the game, we really do need to look at D&I and inclusion as part of that equation moving forward.
Looking at it as part of the equation, of course, is essential. I'm thinking back of, the way that companies have evolved and what is important and the skills that are important to advance in the corporation. Of course, the IQ, the technical skills, the skills that you needed to just do that job function initially were most important. And then people start saying, well, soft skills are equally important, maybe even more so. You need to have that emotional intelligence. You need to be able to interact well with people. And now, Bonita, a lot of folks are saying you need to have cultural intelligence. If you don't have that life experience, you need to at least know enough to be able to empathize with that life experience. How do you promote cultural intelligence in the workplace? What are some of the tools that you've used at Google or that you've talked about other companies using in your book?
Well, I would say yes. We do have an evolution that's going on right now. It started with IQ, then there was EQ, and now it is CQ. And quite frankly, the exemplary leaders of tomorrow will be those that are harnessing the cultural intelligence. And it starts with just having knowledge, base knowledge, as Monique has, as Erika has talked about, as well as thinking about your overall mission. So at Google, we're building products for everyone. We want to be helpful for everyone. So it's a natural for us to make sure that we are training our leaders as well as anyone that has a responsibility for their teams. That's something I think about every single day, is how can I be a better leader for my team? And as we're building products, we're also looking at this moment because we do think where we are right now, that we can harness just the energy of the moment. And there's an opportunity for us to really build in meaningful and lasting change. But we can only do that if we start with the leaders first. And that comes through, one, knowledge, two, making sure that we have the right programs to accelerate the talent, to attract the talent. We've seen increases in that. We were the first one to actually release our diversity report. In fact, I was responsible for founding Howard West, where we looked at harnessing the talent really, again, from everywhere. So looking at the historically Black colleges, we've now expanded that to 10 plus colleges, but starts with knowledge, but it also starts with making sure that we are holding our leaders accountable and making sure that we're living up to our mission to build products and to be helpful to everyone.
Erika, of course, it starts at the top, as Bonita said, and making sure that the leaders are doing this. But also, how effective is it to have employee resource groups, business groups, affinity groups within the organization work together to build that cultural competency, that cultural intelligence, that CQ that Bonita is talking about? What role do employees have in that regard in doing this?
Sure. I think our inclusion networks are an essential part of our global diversity and inclusion strategy. You must have that leadership from the top. I have to repeat that because the role model behavior that comes from the CEO, the C-suite, the board, and that commitment, that's how you can implement policies and practices and goals and metrics to drive diversity and inclusion from the top down. But you need the boots on the ground, and you need to be able to build culture through inclusion networks. So we have 19,000 people at Goldman Sachs that are involved in our inclusion networks, and we have them focused on key pillars, including recruiting, right? So, there are extra arms and legs on campuses, at events that are bringing people into the firm and representing the culture of the firm, which is extremely important to us. So, for our key pillars at the firm, inclusive culture is an important one.
Yes.
Besides the manager training, it is in fact our people in the networks that are driving culture at the firm.
Excellent. Well, all of these issues that we've talked about and the solutions that you've come up with are beneficial not just for Black women in corporate America, but for corporate America. And I appreciate all of you sharing your insights. Thank you so much.